Uh, Good evening, everyone. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Eddy Littler. I'm a virologist. I've been a virologist for nearly 40 years. I worked for a number of years in academia in Canada and the UK. And then I joined my first company about 30 years ago when I joined the Wellcome Research Laboratories in Kent, where I ran about half the virology or antiviral research programs. Went into my first merger when Glaxo acquired Wellcome, and I moved up to Stevenage where I ran antiviral research in Glaxo Wellcome for a number of years. And out of my labs came a drug for influenza virus called Relenza, um, and some other drugs. I left there because it was one merger too many for me, and I went to a Swedish company called Medivir, where we discovered and developed a drug for hepatitis C virus called Olicio, which we outlicensed to J&J. It's it. I'm very proud of this drug. Was used to treat several 100,000 people worldwide. Hep C, as you know, is a fatal virus, but it can be cured with the right drugs. And it earned J&J $10 billion in the first year it was released. Good for the patient is that a better drug came along from a company called Gilead, but that was not so good for my company because our drug got eliminated. And so I left that company and basically, in a roundabout way, joined my current company where I'm chief operating officer of a company called ReViral. A little bit of context. ReViral is working on one virus called respiratory syncytial virus, which infects every single person on the planet by the age of 2 at least once. So about 64 million people get overt infections a year worldwide, and it kills about 250,000 babies a year worldwide. But unfortunately, not many people have heard of it. And there are no vaccines, there are no drugs, there are no treatments. And we're basically into clinical studies currently in pediatrics worldwide. And we've managed to recruit a few patients, which is exceptional in the middle of a COVID outbreak, and in adults with stem cell transplant. And as Sophie said at the very top, and I'll come back to this at the very end, I'm one of the founders of a not-for-profit organization, a CIC it's called, working on coronaviruses. But just a little bit of background. As a virologist, I can't avoid sort of talking about this. As Alice has said before, infections and pandemics are not new. It goes right back to the Black Plague, where actually two single point mutations make it go from a bacteria that infects fleas to one that infects rats, and the second mutation infects humans. Two single point mutations. We have smallpox. We're not quite sure where smallpox came from. Might have been from a camel, but it certainly wasn't a human virus for until quite recently, last couple of 100,000 years. Influenza virus. Basically, it infects birds, and flu viruses are bird viruses. They're not human viruses. But they come from birds, sometimes via an intermediate, often a pig, and infect humans, which is why we get these epidemics and pandemics from flu every so often. HIV is a zoonotic virus. It came from monkeys to human. Probably has come into human population several times before the real big pandemic of HIV. And then we have the more recent ones, Ebola, rabies, coronavirus we all know about. And actually, if you want to give yourself a nightmare, have a look at this little virus called Nipah. If this has infected humans, it's almost 100% lethal when it gets into humans. Fortunately, it hasn't spread from human to human. So after fully depressing you, let's move on to the next slide. Oh, it's me, isn't it? Yeah. So this is a little panel here. Should show you, yeah. So this is a recent review. If you want to look about coronavirus pandemics, have a look at this paper here. It's quite a nice paper. And you can see on the right-hand panel a number of coronaviruses that have got into various populations. First point is that coronaviruses don't just infect humans and don't just form pandemics from humans. There's actually been several pandemics in cattle, in various bird species, and in pig species over the years. You can read that for yourselves. And then we have the original one that we all noticed, the SARS-CoV, basically came out a number of years ago. We have MERS, and we have the current one, SARS-CoV-2. What's the lessons? Mortality rate can vary enormously, and I'll talk about this in the next slide. However, the viruses don't go away. Once they go into whatever population they're in, human or animal, they stay. Now, the effect of a vaccine, I'm giving a talk about vaccines and coronavirus on Monday. How the vaccines play out is going to be interesting to see. But I think most of us believe that while the vaccines will have a huge impact once we do manage to roll them out, it won't fully eliminate the virus from the human population. We will still get yearly infections, but hopefully nowhere near as dangerous as what we've seen now. The viruses are quite similar, which is why they've recombined. This is a big problem. And as I said here, been 3 human pandemics since the year 2000. So, oops. So this is another panel. This shows you SARS-CoV, MERS, and SARS-CoV-2. Look at the lethality. The original SARS was 10% lethal. MERS was 35% lethal. 1 in 3 people who got MERS died. And we've got SARS-CoV-2, somewhere around about 0.5 to 1%. It's a little bit difficult to judge it now. We got this famous R number, which is vastly abused by politicians and journalists. However, the R number does have some relevance when you've studied it for a long period of time. SARS-CoV was basically quite low, 0.1 to 1. So we didn't get a major epidemic of SARS. MERS, thank heavens, was very low. And MERS is still actually infecting people in the Middle East. And then we've got SARS-CoV-2, which unfortunately does have an R value above 1, somewhere between 1.5 and 3. All these viruses come from bats, these coronaviruses. They sometimes infect via intermediates, and you can see them on the right-hand side. These are proposed intermediates. No one's really formally proved them, but the civet, probably for SARS-CoV, camel for MERS, and we think the pangolin for SARS-CoV-2. That's a little bit unproven yet. It says here, there are to date 30 different bat coronaviruses identified. That's actually way wrong. In Wuhan alone, there are over 500 different coronaviruses that have been identified since we've had CoV-2 emerge. So it's a huge number. The major change is a reassortment in the virus genome that brings in a segment which allows it to use the human ACE2 as a receptor. So one single reassortment allows the virus to get into humans. Now, other factors determine how well it infects and how lethal it is. If you look at this, can you imagine a virus which was as lethal as MERS, but with the R value of SARS-CoV-2? We've been very, very lucky. And this whole family of viruses is poised for pandemic, and we will see more, as Alistair said before. So innovation during pandemic. At the very end, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're doing in the new not-for-profit company. What happened in the biotech is that many companies repositioned the work to work on aspects of SARS-CoV-2. And I'm going to be a bit controversial here. It's very admirable that people did that. But what's the opportunity cost and what's the long-term cost? Because having been around quite a long time and seen SARS and MERS come out, there is a pattern that basically you end up with government money and NGO money and industry money flooding into these diseases. Once those diseases either go away like SARS, the original SARS, or fade into the background like MERS, that money disappears. You couldn't get money 2 years after SARS. You couldn't get a bean out of anyone to work on SARS 2 years after. So that's a worry. And those companies that shifted what was a very good business plan to work on SARS may have an issue in the next couple of years. Others, I think, have reconsidered their business plan. I speak to many people running this and focus on the bottom line to conserve cash. And I think those companies will be more robust going forward. There's been a lot of money going around. Government signs from academia and biotech has increased. It can be a bit unfocused. And of course, it's going to be counterbalanced by the effects of Brexit and losing Horizon 2020. It's going to be a major problem going forward. Now, I work in the biotech sector, have done for many years. We just closed in ReViral a Series C of $44 million in August. It was the most very, very tricky period to raise money. there was a period of time, I think, between about March and the summer when investors were very nervous and they were mostly investing in their existing companies. And there was very little money in what's called seed rounds or Series A. However, I think now investors are surprisingly positive. There are good investments being made in a number of companies, not just my own. So this is ReViral. This is what we've done with ReViral. We're running 2 phase 2 studies, as I said before, for pediatrics and for adult stem cell. The COVID pandemic and the subsequent lockdown created a hiatus in recruitment. It was very, very difficult to recruit patients in either of these populations when we really got hit. Um, what we've done is we refocused on the most productive sites where recruitment's being restored. So Asian Pacific, lots of these societies like Thailand and Taiwan and South Korea, because of their lockdowns, have created national bubbles. So there's very little COVID, but all the other viruses now are circulating as normal. Australia's had a huge, huge amount of COVID come out in the last few months. So that's one of the things we did, and we're now recruiting very well. It's a great relief to us. Another company that I'm very familiar with, company I was CEO of, and Reno Seva was one of the founders of, is a company called Domainex, a very sophisticated company working in drug discovery. What they did was move to shifts, 4 days a week, 10 hours a day, and then 4 days off. It increased their safety because they could space people out, but actually increased the productivity. And amazingly, many of the Domainex staff now actually prefer to work this time shift. We also established 3C. This is the Collaborative Community for Coronaviruses. It's not for profit. We raised £100,000 in donations one Friday a few months ago, and we've created alliances with a big pharma, which we're very familiar with, and a mid-sized European pharma and some academic groups. And what we've done with the big pharma so far is we've taken a chemical library from them of 8,000 compounds. This is not random HTS. I'm not a big fan of HTS and a sort of diversity screen. Having been involved in many of these with Glaxo, they're very inefficient screens. Instead, these are targeted. These are targeted at specific coronavirus targets, and they were generated within this big pharma by some of my colleagues to specifically inhibit viral targets. So in this case, viral polymerases. And we've screened 8,000 compounds. We have got about 400 hits from that primary screen against, this is against SARS-CoV-2. And we're starting to work those through. So far, they look very encouraging, but these compounds will not be ready for this particular pandemic. SARS-CoV-2, these compounds will take about 5 years to come through to the clinic. Instead, these are basically going to be pan-coronavirus inhibitors to prepare us for the next pandemic when that's ready. So, a bit of conclusion. Companies that continue to be established, it's amazing, but companies are being established. There's investment still going on. It's stimulating vaccine companies and platform technologies. There's a lot of them coming through, and other anti-infectives. I would question, being a bit cynical, how long that's going to happen for, when that's going to go away. There's more funds and loans available from government for biotech, which is very, very useful for early stage companies. The more established companies have evolved. They've changed a lot. They've adapted. We've all learned to be flexible about what we're doing. And that actually, I think, will leave those companies in a much stronger position long term. Investment is still very active. And the sort of IPO market is still very positive. There's still lots of IPOs happening. An antiviral company called Atea did an IPO about a month ago for $1.5 billion. And that was predominantly based around their products on COVID-19. The share price went down significantly when the first vaccines reported. I think investors are being a bit more late stage focused. And China is becoming very, very interesting as both investors and partners. We've all wondered about this for a long period of time. It now seems to be happening. Certainly ReViral, we took our lead investor in our Series C was a Chinese Thai group who are excellent investors and partners in the company. But there are also Chinese companies who are busy going now becoming much more ambitious in what they're trying to do in the antiviral, anti-drug discovery space, which is fascinating to see.